Have you ever wondered if the key to a healthier mind is hiding somewhere you haven't looked? What if it's not just about therapy, but also about theology? Well, today we're going to dive into how modern psychology and Islamic tradition are teaming up, offering a powerful new way to think about emotional well-being.
So let's just get right to the heart of it. Faith is supposed to be a source of comfort, right? A rock in stormy weather. But is it always? Could the very thing we turn to for healing actually, sometimes, stand in the way of our own recovery? It's a tough question, but a really important one.
And to help answer it, this really fascinating field is taking shape, called Islamic psychology. Think of it as building a bridge. On one side, you've got all the insights of modern science. On the other, the deep wisdom of spiritual tradition. This field is trying to connect the two, to give us a much fuller picture of what it means to be mentally and spiritually healthy.
All right, so let's dig into that a little more. What exactly is Islamic psychology, and what makes it a new way of looking at things?
First off, this isn't just a casual conversation happening somewhere on the internet. This is a serious academic movement. We're talking peer-reviewed journals, rigorous research, a real formal effort to create a psychological framework that's grounded in both science and faith.
So, let's be super clear here. The goal of Islamic psychology isn't to throw out modern science, not at all. It's about taking what we already know from psychology and enriching it, integrating it with Islamic principles to create something more holistic, something that speaks to both the mind and the soul.
And you know, this process isn't just guesswork. It's incredibly methodical. They follow a careful 5-step framework. Researchers and Islamic scholars get together, they pick a concept, say something like attachment theory, and they carefully evaluate it, adapt it, and make sure it aligns with core beliefs before it ever gets tested in the real world. It's a really thoughtful approach.
Okay, so that's the how. But what does this look like in practice? What does this integrated approach say is the real foundation for our emotional stability? Well, it all comes down to finding your heart's true north.
And at the absolute center of that idea is a concept called mahabba. It's this deep, sincere, and profound love for God. In psychology, we might call this the ultimate emotional anchor. You know, in attachment theory, they talk about a secure base, that safe place you can always return to. Well, in this framework, mahabba is that secure base.
This idea of getting our attachments in the right order is absolutely central. This verse from the Quran is basically a powerful gut check, asking us to look at our emotional priorities. From a psychological perspective, it's a warning. When our attachment to temporary people or things becomes bigger than our connection to the divine, we risk becoming emotionally lost at sea.
And this ties right into the core Islamic principle of tawhid, the oneness of God. Psychologically speaking, this is a game changer. When God is at the center of your heart, you stop putting fallible human beings on a pedestal. It's like a built-in protection against that anxious attachment style where you're constantly looking to another person to be your everything, which of course, they can never be.
Okay, so that's the ideal, right? A secure attachment to God leads to a stable, secure you. But we all know life is way more complicated than that.
Which brings us right back to that big question from the beginning. If faith is such a powerful anchor, then does being more religious automatically mean you have better mental health? Well, the research shows that the answer is not so simple. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. A major study on Muslims in the US found a surprising twist. The connection between faith and mental health wasn't a straight line. It all came down to how a person was using their faith, especially when they were struggling. And that how brings us to a really critical idea, not just for Islam, but for anyone who's religious or spiritual. It's the danger of something called a spiritual bypass. So what on earth is a spiritual bypass? Well, it's basically when we use spiritual ideas or language to sidestep our messy, difficult human emotions. It's saying, I'll just pray about it as a way to avoid actually dealing with grief or anger or the tough work of figuring out our problems. It's using faith as an escape route. And the study's findings on this were just stark. Look at this. For people who didn't do a lot of spiritual bypassing, being more religious was actually linked to lower depression. That's great. But for people with high levels of spiritual bypass, the whole thing flipped. For them, being more religious was linked to more depression, more anxiety, and more stress. And it didn't stop there. The researchers also looked at what made people feel stigma about getting professional mental health help. And guess what?
Spiritual bypass was an even stronger predictor of that stigma than religiosity itself. In other words, it wasn't just being religious that was the barrier. It was the habit of avoiding your problems with spiritual excuses.
So here's the bottom line. Using your faith like a shield to hide from your real-world problems doesn't just not work. It can actually backfire. It can make your mental health worse, and it can build a wall between you and the professional help that can make a real difference.
So, where does that leave us? Is faith helpful or harmful? Well, the answer seems to be, it depends. It all comes down to finding a balanced path, one that uses faith in a healthy, constructive way.
And what Islamic psychology proposes is that an authentic faith isn't an escape hatch. It's a tool. It's the resource that gives you the strength and the patience and the perspective you need to face your challenges head-on, not run away from them.
So what does that balanced path actually look like? Well, it starts with just acknowledging that your pain is real. It means using prayer and other practices for real comfort and resilience, not to pretend the problem isn't there. It means understanding that seeing a therapist and being a person of faith are not mutually exclusive. They can, and often do, work together beautifully. It's about confronting our problems, not spiritually bypassing them.
And that brings us back to where we started, but hopefully with a lot more clarity. The real question isn't if faith can heal, but how we're using it in our own lives. And maybe that's the final thought for all of us to reflect on. Are our spiritual practices a bridge that's helping us walk toward healing, or have they accidentally become a barrier, blocking the very path we're trying to find?